Listen up, gentlemen. Right now, thousands of men are watching their partners fake satisfaction because they've been following advice that sounds confident, but ignores how the female body actually works. You might think you're doing everything right, but if she's not responding the way you hoped, it's not about effort. It's about understanding biology that most men never learned. What I'm about to share isn't opinion or guesswork. This is based on nerve pathway research, clinical studies on arousal patterns, and observations from thousands of intimate consultations. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why most approaches fail and what actually works when you want her to experience genuine, repeatable pleasure. The difference between hoping she enjoys herself and knowing she will comes down to 3 specific techniques that work with her physiology instead of against it. The research data is startling when you actually look at it. Approximately 75% of women need direct external stimulation to reach climax. Yet the vast majority of men rush through this phase, apply inconsistent pressure, and completely miss the physical signals that indicate whether arousal is building or disappearing. This isn't about performance anxiety or emotional connection, although those matter. This is about the fundamental mechanics of how nerve endings respond to touch, how blood flow increases in specific tissue, and how the brain interprets those signals as pleasure or discomfort. When you understand the science, everything changes. You stop guessing and start recognizing exactly what's working in real time. The techniques I'm explaining today are drawn from studies on dopamine release, oxytocin bonding, tactile sensitivity thresholds, and the way circulation patterns shift during arousal. These aren't abstract concepts. They translate directly into physical actions that produce measurable responses. The first principle addresses the single most common mistake men make, and it happens in the first 60 seconds of intimate contact. Most guys go directly for the most sensitive areas, without understanding that sensitivity isn't the same as readiness. Imagine someone touching your eyeball when you're not expecting it. That's how jarring premature direct contact feels to tissue that contains over 8,000 nerve endings, more concentrated sensitivity than your entire palm combined. That area needs gradual engagement, not immediate intensity. Here's how you correct that approach. Start with moisture, either what's naturally present or a quality water-based lubricant, because dry friction against sensitive tissue triggers discomfort signals faster than pleasure signals. Use 2 fingers or a gentle touch over the protective fold of skin rather than making direct contact with exposed tissue right away. This protective hood exists for a reason. It allows stimulation to be filtered and gradual rather than overwhelming. Maintain a steady, rhythmic gliding motion for at least 45 seconds before you even consider adjusting pressure. The rhythm matters more than you think because the nervous system responds to predictable patterns. Erratic movement confuses the signals and disrupts arousal momentum. Watch her breathing. Feel how her body shifts. Notice whether she's pressing forward or pulling back. Those nonverbal cues tell you everything about whether you're building arousal or shutting it down. If you change technique abruptly, her arousal drops immediately. If you stay patient and consistent, her body will naturally invite more intensity. Now here's something most men don't know. There's a direct correlation between how you handle this initial phase and whether she'll be able to reach climax later. If you rush this part, you're essentially setting up a physiological roadblock that makes everything harder afterward. But if you take your time here, You're priming her entire nervous system to be more responsive, more receptive, and more likely to build toward release naturally. That's not romantic language. That's measurable neuroscience. The brain needs time to process pleasure signals and distinguish them from discomfort. When you move slowly enough for those pathways to activate fully, everything downstream becomes easier. The second principle is something men used to understand instinctively, but somehow forgot in the age of performance pressure and rushed intimacy. Think back to slow dancing when you were younger. Bodies pressed together, moving in sync. That buildup of tension and warmth that happened without any direct sexual contact. That wasn't accidental chemistry. That was your body's activating neural pathways responsible for bonding, anticipation, and arousal. Full body contact, steady rhythmic motion, and shared breathing patterns trigger oxytocin release and increase blood flow to the pelvic region by several 100%. This isn't foreplay in the traditional sense. This is mature physical communication that prepares both bodies for deeper intimacy. Here's the formula that works. Begin with gentle body contact through clothing to establish warmth and balance pressure across a wider surface area. Don't rush to remove clothes. Let the friction and heat build naturally. Press your bodies together, front to front, and match your breathing to hers. This synchronization might sound minor, but it creates a feedback loop that amplifies arousal in both partners. Once you establish that rhythm, guide subtle hip movement forward and back with gentle circular patterns that mirror the motion of relaxed dancing, rather than the aggressive thrusting most men default to. This particular movement increases blood flow to the deeper erectile tissues that run along both sides of the pelvis, tissues most men don't even know exist. When you stimulate those structures slowly and consistently, you're building arousal from the inside out, not just on the surface. This approach becomes psychologically intimate because it requires presence, attention, and responsiveness. You're not performing a series of mechanical steps. You're creating a shared physical experience where both bodies influence each other's rhythm. When she looks up and meets your eyes during this phase, you'll know instantly that you're aligned, not just physically, but emotionally. That eye contact releases another wave of oxytocin, deepening the bond and intensifying the physical sensations. This is why rushed encounters so often feel empty, even when they're technically successful. You're bypassing the neurochemical processes that make intimacy feel meaningful. The third principle challenges something almost every man gets wrong, without realizing it. Most guys focus on precision when they should be thinking about surface area. Narrow, pointed movement, whether with fingers or tongue, often feels too sharp against the most sensitive skin. The nerve endings in that region don't respond well to concentrated pressure points. They respond to broader, warmer, more consistent contact that sends fuller signals to the brain's pleasure centers. This activates both pressure receptors and vibration receptors simultaneously, creating a layered sensation that builds arousal more effectively than pinpoint stimulation ever could. When you're using your tongue, think about using the entire flat surface rather than just the tip. Keep the movement slow and controlled, resisting the urge to speed up, even when you think more intensity would be better. Cover the full external area with broad strokes before returning to the most responsive points. This creates a pattern of anticipation where her nervous system starts predicting where the next sensation will occur, which actually amplifies the pleasure response. Match your rhythm to her breathing, because her respiratory rate directly reflects her arousal level. When her breathing deepens and slows, that's your signal to maintain exactly what you're doing. When it becomes shallow or irregular, you've either crossed into overstimulation territory or you've lost the rhythm that was working. Here's something that might surprise you. Gentle humming or low vocal vibration during oral contact can significantly enhance physical sensation through acoustic resonance. This isn't a trick or a gimmick. Medical devices designed to enhance pleasure now mimic this exact principle because the vibration frequency interacts with nerve endings in ways that static pressure cannot. The resonance travels through tissue and activates deeper nerve clusters that wouldn't respond to surface touch alone. You're not just stimulating the immediate contact area, you're creating waves of sensation that spread through surrounding tissue. Clinical studies have documented that these methods, when combined with emotional connection and unhurried timing, help approximately 9 out of 10 women reach climax within minutes, rather than the 20 or 30 minutes that rushed, imprecise techniques require. That's a massive difference in success rate, and it comes down entirely to working with physiology instead of fighting it. The 5 most common mistakes that interrupt this process involve pressure inconsistency, speed escalation at the wrong moments, ignoring verbal and non-verbal feedback, focusing on penetration before sufficient arousal, and assuming that what worked once will work every time without adjustment. Female arousal isn't linear. It fluctuates based on stress levels, hormonal cycles, emotional state, and even room temperature. What worked perfectly last week might need modification today, which is why attention and responsiveness matter more than memorizing a technique. Understanding the science behind these approaches changes everything about how you think about intimacy. When you know that the external structure is only the visible part of a much larger system of erectile tissue that extends several inches internally, you stop thinking about surface-level stimulation and start considering how to engage those deeper structures. When you understand that arousal involves a cascade of neurochemical releases, including dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins that need time to build and interact, you stop rushing through phases that seem unimportant but are actually critical to the overall response. When you recognize that nerve pathway activation requires consistent input over a sustained period before the brain interprets those signals as pleasure rather than just sensation, you develop the patience to let arousal build naturally instead of trying to force it through intensity alone. The practical application of this knowledge is straightforward, but requires genuine commitment to awareness. Pay attention to how her body responds in real time. Notice whether her muscles are tensing or relaxing, whether she's pulling you closer or subtly creating distance, whether her breathing is deepening or becoming erratic. These signals tell you immediately whether your current approach is working or needs adjustment. If you're not sure what a particular response means, slow down and maintain steady contact while you observe what happens next. The worst thing you can do is keep changing techniques every 30 seconds because you're anxious about whether it's working. That anxiety translates directly into inconsistent touch, which disrupts arousal more effectively than almost anything else. Here's what separates men who actually understand female pleasure from men who just hope for the best. The former group recognizes that arousal is a process with identifiable stages that build on each other. You can't skip stages and expect the same result. You can't rush through early phases and then wonder why later phases don't produce the response you're hoping for. Each stage prepares the body physiologically and psychologically for the next. When you honor that progression, everything becomes easier and more successful. When you ignore it, you're essentially working against her body's natural design. The hood glide principle works because it respects sensitivity thresholds and allows nerve endings to acclimate to stimulation gradually. The alignment method works because it engages larger structures and creates neurochemical bonding that amplifies physical sensation. The broad contact approach works because it matches how those particular nerve clusters actually process and transmit pleasure signals to the brain. None of this is guesswork. It's applied biology. The more you understand about how these systems function, the more consistent and reliable your results become. There's also a psychological component that can't be ignored. When a woman knows you're paying genuine attention to her responses, rather than following some mental checklist, she relaxes. That relaxation allows blood flow to increase, muscles to release tension that blocks sensation, and her mind to focus on physical feeling rather than performance anxiety or self-consciousness. Your presence and attention create safety, and safety is absolutely essential for most women to reach climax. This isn't about romance or emotional connection in the abstract sense. It's about creating physiological conditions where her nervous system can function optimally without interference from stress hormones that constrict blood vessels and dull sensation. Practice these principles with patience and genuine curiosity about what works specifically for your partner, because while the underlying biology is universal, individual responses vary based on sensitivity levels, previous experiences, and current state. What creates intense pleasure for one woman might be too intense or not intense enough for another. The principles give you a framework, but real skill comes from applying that framework with attention to the unique person you're with. That's where technique becomes art. That's where knowledge becomes genuine connection.